So it's an evening session without the tea break, I would say. So I'll try to not bore. We'll try to be relevant. And then we're talking about policies. Yes. I mean, that's another thing which has bored me a lot in my chartered accountancy. I'll not try to repeat that here. So we'll talk about something everybody can relate. How many of you in the room use CRED for payments? Good numbers. How many of you find the CRED rewards very useful? Sorry, I didn't want to create any controversy, but all I'm saying is, CRED has started with that concept of rewards. Everybody, even I signed up because there were a lot of rewards. We were expecting a lot of cashbacks. Being Indian, being human, everybody loves cashback. And the same is the case with industries as well. So all these policies, incentives we talk about, it's typically those cashbacks. They are not the basis for decision making initially, but they help customers to get retained and get motivated and feel better. So we'll take it from that perspective. I think we have very good speakers on the dais now, very experienced ones. So before we get into technical details, I'll set some context. So we are going to talk about policy frameworks, be it from central government, from state government. How did governments claim that they have opened the Tijori for GCC? I mean, that's the claim, at least in the news, that they are giving away so much of benefits, billions of dollars in the cashback, in the incentives, in R&D. So what are those incentives? Which are the industries getting benefited? Which one works? Which one doesn't work? And then how is it relevant for GCCs? Okay, so without getting into too much of nuances and the clauses of those policies, we'll talk about whether it works or doesn't work for us. We'll talk about specifically semiconductor industry because we have already someone with 27 years of experience. I can vouch, I didn't know about semiconductors 27 years ago. And many of you would not have heard what is semiconductors. So thanks for being here. Another domains, I would say, if not industries, R&D is a big focus now. Engineering, deep tech, even this budget, there are a lot of announcements about deep tech, about R&D budgets. How it's helping the companies, how it's helping, whether it's helping GCCs or at least the ecosystem, we'll talk about that. So if we break down the impact, primarily how much is the impact on investments, which is coming to India? GCCs which are investing, the headquarters would decide to get a GCC built in India or expand a GCC. Two would be the talent. How did it help talent to expand? And third thing will be IP and innovation. So these will be the key themes we are going to talk about. My first question to you, Sandeep. You have seen this industry's evolution. I mean, 27 years is such a long period for one industry to see. You have seen it from very nuanced stage. Now it's all over, the semiconductor specifically. We want to learn from your journey that what you have noticed in this evolution journey. And then how do you see these policies or frameworks helping your industry specifically or the ecosystem and motivating the headquarters to invest more?
All right. So it's been a long time in this industry. And so when I joined, even we had just one chapter on semiconductors in our engineering coursework. And then I joined this industry. I got a job in a startup, a US-based startup run by an Indian. And he opened a center in Pune, so that's how I got the job. And it was very interesting to learn about this industry. And then at that time, when people used to ask me, like for, I think, up to 2000s, I used to say I designed those black things that you see inside a computer. Okay? That's how I introduced myself.
Yes, I remember
and then
that.
People didn't know, I didn't know how to say. Then I started saying, okay, I designed chips. And then obvious jokes were, oh, Lay's chips, whatever, right? But now I can say semiconductors, like, okay, so before that, then COVID, when I started saying I designed chips, people used to say, hey man, there's so much shortage. What are you doing about it? And then now I can say semiconductors because it's all over the place. So that gives a perspective of how this industry has grown over time, over the last 25, 30 years, where it was a virtual unknown. sort of an industry, but now it has grown where it is in collective consciousness of everyone. And similarly, the kind of work that I did when I started versus the kind of work that I'm doing today is completely different. We've moved up the value chain from doing back-end work to owning products right out of here in India, end-to-end products. So I would say our workforce is probably at 90% at par with the US headquarters in terms of technical capability, in terms of designing products. The only thing that we are not today is a P&L. We are still a cost center. But yes, in terms of, and that has basically, now there are so many Indians who've moved back from the US, they have the experience. So we've built that capability over here for innovation in India. And then the second part with respect to policy, and again, now people know about semiconductors primarily because of the government policies. As Shami said, government is pumping billions of dollars through many different schemes. There's PLI, there's DLI, there's the Research and Development Initiative, there's Electronic Component Manufacturing Scheme. And these are all schemes which are oversubscribed. People are applying for these schemes. Of course, these are for Indian companies, not for MNCs so far. But of course, if they want to do a JV in India, that is more than welcome. And that's how it is being taken forward. Of course, you need to have a 51% stake by an Indian. But basically what that is doing is the 10% gap that I was talking about, which is more on the manufacturing side, that is now getting filled. Of course, we are still far behind the rest of the world, maybe decades behind Taiwan, but that doesn't matter because we are starting to build that, and it won't take us decades to get there. It will take us probably not multiple decades, but maybe a decade to get there. So policies do play a very important part, and due to which it is now spurring the growth of both Indian startups, Indian companies, putting in a lot of money. So L&T is putting money into it. L&T has a semiconductor division now. And of course, when you have Indian companies building products end to end, the GCCs know now that this talent exists in India. And of course, what that also does is it also builds the local ecosystem, not only for designing, but in terms of customer base. So now you have global CEOs coming to India and courting the government to buy their products. So of course the government needs a lot of servers, data centers, for all kinds of things. In fact, next week there's, I don't know if many of you will know, there's a very big summit in Delhi called the AI Impact Summit. The global CEOs of all big companies are going to be there. PM himself is going to be there. And you will see it over the news. And the kind of impact that is going to create. So all in all, I will say basically the policies that the government has put together over the last few years has put so much life into this industry that everyone is just talking about it, right? And not just talking about it, there's a lot of action on the ground. And me being part of the Semiconductor Association as well, I see that on a day-to-day basis. The number of startups that are there in India is just amazing.
Perfect. So, I mean, we have started late, but doesn't mean we'll finish last with
Absolutely
that.
not.
Government has the focus on specifically these sectors, and then which they see as future. I mean, the semiconductor is one thing, we can't live without it. You are powering up the AI, you are powering up the whole
Absolutely.
ecosystem around AI with that. So next question relates to the AI then. Being somewhere a plug for the AI, how do you use AI yourself for your processes?
So ours is a very niche industry. So AI is going to come the last in our industry for, I mean, of course, for using for accounting and all of that purposes, we will use AI. But in terms of actual chip design, it's coming up. It's not yet mature. It's not there yet. But I anticipate within a year's time, we all will be forced to use it for different aspects of chip design as well. But yes, we do power the whole AI revolution. We are building chips out of India for the AI inference and training. Those are the kind of chips that we design, which are the most cutting edge. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer you very clearly, but for AI, use of AI within the chip industry, it's just starting out.
Thank you. So I think Durga, Kapil has already spoke
Yes.
at length on AI. That was the theme of the presentation.
Yes,
before
and
this.
just
You
to
want
add to what
Yeah.
Sandeep said, that even from our organization standpoint, we utilize and adopt a lot of AI, AI powered tools, which helps us and to automate the recruitment process, right from screening the CV to matching the job descriptions to kind of enhancing the job roles, locations, etc. This is one way of utilizing the AI tool that we do. We also have a lot of tools that give us the entire, the scorecard of the assessments. So earlier there was a lengthy process in terms of getting through the assessments. There are, linguistic assessments. There are a lot of ways that you need to assess the candidate depending upon the requirement of the client. So that is another way. Additionally, I think we use a lot of chatbots, which actually enhances the, candidate engagement with us, because it saves a lot of human time, human intervention. We do a lot of initial level discussions with the candidates through the chatbots. We run them through the joining processes and training materials, etc., through the AI chatbots. So I think from the staffing standpoint or the industry that we belong to, we are first, and we would want to get into a lot of AI adoption and digital adoptions.
Yeah, thank you. So now there is a question for the audience. How many of you are not born in metro cities? Not born in metro? Wow. I'm also one of them. So almost 80%. So next question is something for us. Now, yes. Now, yes. When we were born, no. Yeah, so it's subjective. So next question is about the state policies, right? So we must have heard about Maharashtra is doing a policy, Karnataka doing a policy, UP doing a policy on GCCs. Somebody promises the land subsidy, somebody promises the capex benefit, somebody promises R&D getting free. One thing which is common across all is salary incentives, so cashback, like I referred initially. You spend first, then you claim the cashback. There's some opposite terminology as well, like Maharashtra says, we'll pay you when you hire technical resources, highly paid resources. Karnataka says opposite. It says, we'll pay you back on your intern's salary. So, but theme is common. Every government wants to showcase that if you are investing in India, we are there to give you back one pie of it, if you qualify for certain conditions. And another thing which is common is everyone want to take it beyond metro. So most of these incentives at least get doubled beyond metros. Even in Maharashtra policies, all the benefits gets doubled when you go to Nagpur or Nasik or like of these cities. UP doesn't have any such industry, so of course they have a different rules, but even Karnataka says that if you do anything beyond Bangalore, our incentives are massive. So looking at those patterns which are developing in last 2 to 3 years at least, we have seen a lot of such things coming out, Durga, for you. Since you work predominantly in talent landscape, it's giving an opportunity to people to work with it from home. I mean, we always talk about hybrid, but working from a metro city home versus working from your real home with your parents and neighbors is very different. How do you see this shaping up in talent market, specifically these kind of policies, and how do you see companies trying this out with those incentives?
Well, see, while you have already covered most of the policies, like, what state governments are coming up with a lot of enhanced policies, which would give you redemption, exemption in electricity, infrastructure, capex on your, the land policies. We also get refunds on the patents that we register, etc. I love the terrific policy which Uttar Pradesh government has also, explicitly launched, which is they also have touched upon a very sensitive point of looking at the talent pool and their payrolling pattern, where they are offering anything between 1.2 to 1.7 lakhs of the salary stake for every employee every year. So I believe today what is happening is the states are actually competing with each other, right? So because everybody wants to sort of attract these GCCs and want them to establish their hubs at their respective regions. And because of the schemes that are getting introduced, everywhere we see a differentiation or the hypes or hikes on the schemes that they are trying to bring upon. Along with this, we see a lot of infrastructural development that is happening when we look at the kind of buildings that are getting established now are quite fancy with end-to-end facilities available within the building. The air connectivity that we see is also on a wide range now. The roads are getting nicely developed. From the network standpoint, there is a lot that has happened in terms of penetrating with the small villages where earlier internet and mobile connectivity was something that you could only dream of because you need to stand under one pole and kind of, you move a slide, and then you lose the networks. So today that challenge has also been addressed is what I feel. So considering all of this, and I would like to give you one example. So recently I attended one of the events in Pune organized by Andhra Pradesh government. And they sort of very beautifully articulated the kind of work that they are doing to sort of enhance their own state, to kind of uplift their talent pool. So with regards to the talent pool, they were actually associating and tying up with the institutes on the large scale, the small scale and mid-size academies as well. And not only with institutes, but they have also ensured that they are tying up at a level of mandals. So mandals are something that are there in the villages, right? So the people there are talented, but probably they don't have that kind of scope to kind of come up and, leverage the facilities. So for them, they also kind of service with the training programs which are sponsored. And then they also have the internships that are been tied up with the various organizations. So I think infrastructure-wise, connectivity-wise, everywhere, there is a lot that we are, seeing at the state level. And I feel all of this forms a bubble, which is a flywheel trust, basis which I think overall all the states putting in so much of, push from their sides, we can strongly represent India at a global level as a manufacturing sandbox. That's what I feel.
Yeah. Sandeep, one line from you. So do you feel these incentives and other benefits which government is trying to do, companies like yours which are heavily spending in R&D and a lot of, it's more of a process, right, where you get more incentive than anybody else who is just merely doing a service. Company like yours size will try these tier 2, 3 cities and they will get enough talent there, or they can build enough talent there?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, so there are two strong movements that I'm seeing are happening. One is hiring talent from tier 2 cities, which is, so earlier, people would, like if I want an engineer, I would go to tier 1 colleges like College of Engineering Pune or IITs, but the ROI is low for us in terms of retention, etc. So now we are going to tier 2 cities, and they're so hungry for work. They're so hungry and they're so motivated, and it's amazing. And that talent exists there. And they just want to basically uplift themselves, and we are providing that opportunity. So it's a win-win situation. It's not that I'm trying to say that we are doing some dharmatma kaam or anything of that sort. It's a need, and it gets fulfilled through that. That is one. Second is, yes, GCCs are moving to tier 2 cities. So, and as Durga was also mentioning, the state policies, and as you were also mentioning, that states are promoting tier 2 cities. So that movement is also happening because what happens is that when you hire people in tier 2 cities, they have their family, they've been born and brought up there. If they have the option not to move, they will not move. Most of them. Some of them, of course, will move. So the retention is higher. So if you look at Hubli, right? Hubli is a tier 2 city. It's nowhere on the map, but in semiconductor industry, they are doing really well. There are 6 companies over there in Hubli. So which is really good, and they have a really good institute. So there's a lot of movement happening because ultimately the bigger cities are going to get saturated, and the cost advantage goes away. And to fulfill the cost, so sort of to offset the cost advantage, there are only 2 ways you can do it. Either you go up the value chain, or you make your cost lower by going to tier 2 cities. So definitely that is going to happen. That is what we are going to see now.
So we hope 5 years from now, we can travel from Hinjawadi to Kharadi in 20 minutes. When these companies are moving out of Pune or Mumbai or Bangalore, definitely the talent will also move, and that's cities will decongest.
I don't think it will be at the cost of companies moving out of tier 1 cities. Tier 1 cities will still have the GCCs, but they will have their satellite centers in tier 2s. That is certainly good.
And that is how it's shaping up. So everybody has their primary centers when they're scaling up in tier 1, because that's when you get easily the talent, but then when you have to penetrate, you get deeper to tier 2 where you can retain and sustain longer. Thank you for that. So another very important question for you, Sandeep, is you have seen this journey of GCCs being a transaction processing center or execution center or center trusted for delivering work which somebody else want you to do. Versus now we are more trusted for creating values. We are more getting autonomy to do things on our own, do R&D, being a driver rather than just being a supporter for the growth engine for the whole company. I think that shift is visible in many industries. It's more visible, like you said, 90% of your peers are doing the same work, which US is doing. That's phenomenal. I mean, in other GCC, on an average, it's slightly lower. But how do you see this shift happening practically, and how do our stakeholders take it? How does it boost confidence of your stakeholder to invest more and trust us more?
Yeah, so I think it takes only a few individuals, frankly, for something like this to happen. As head of GCCs over here in India, we have to create execution machines who can execute to perfection and use that as the platform to get ownership. And you just need 1 or 2 leaders who are end-to-end ownership in India. And that is how you're going to increase yourself in the value chain. And so frankly, it's not like all the 10,000 people that work for a company need to be that. It's just the leaders who need to do that. And I have seen that in my work, where we have pitched to the US headquarters that we want to own this project end to end, and we got it. Like, we had to push hard, but we got to own it, and that's how now we are doing more and more and more and work out of India. And that's true for any GCC, I would say.
Perfect. So the last question for you, Durga. Beyond these policy incentives and everything else we talked about in the last 20 minutes, what do you see driving the GCC decisions for India?
So I think there are, it's high time that we should take the ownership, take the center stage, and own the P&L on our own. So it's time that we should move only from the POCs to kind of taking up the productions. Secondly, I think the talent pool readiness, as even Kapil mentioned in his slide, that are we ready with the talent pool, the kind of GCCs and the projects that we are attracting today in India and the kind of setups that we are doing, are we really ready for it? So does the talent pool availability is here? So which means that we need to take some initiatives in terms of reskilling and upskilling our existing talent force. This could be one thing. And how do you really do it? Because not that everybody you would have the internal tutors or education platforms. Here, I believe the institutions and academics play a very crucial role. So we need to tie up with appropriate institutions and academies so that our workforce has been well trained. And when we talk about these academics, I think the evaluation parameter has to be very, very strong, because we do not want to kind of continue the legacy way of learning things in a specific syllabus. We would definitely want to align ourselves with the upgraded version of the education that we want our workforce to have. So I think this is one of the factors. And most importantly, I believe that leadership development is something that we should actually focus on as well, because again, so many projects, so many business coming in. Do we have these kind of leaders to kind of lead this entire process? So that is also one of the important factors. And the leaders should also be able to cope up with the speed that we are going and we are growing. So I think all in all, it is also a time that we shift ourselves from the short-term projects to the long-term value capabilities.
Thank you. We are on time now. Can we take one question, if we have permission for that? Just one, yeah.
My question is to Durga. Durga, you mentioned 2 points. One is that you mentioned that states are competing against each other to move GCCs into their respective states. You talked about UP giving an example of giving a salary subsidy. So each state have their own policies, right? Do you think that there should be one overarching national policy framework so that there is consistency in terms of what the states are doing and also from an overall country standpoint? Just wanted to get your view on that.
Yeah, so I feel that, this is very easy. I think we need to just wait and watch, because this is what we are establishing today. Now, even if you see the upgradations that have happened in terms of the policies, like semiconductor 1.0 to 2.0, then you have the indigenous factors that we are trying to do, that homegrown products, that we are trying to build an ecosystem where we want to kind of, build the ecosystem wherein the end-to-end project is getting implemented at our own stage. So we do not want to only design the chips, but we want to kind of start it from, procuring the material and then designing it, manufacture it, and do the testing part of it, and as well as do the packing of it. So I think now that this is just the beginning, while we are today talking about tier 1s, we are gradually shifting to tier 2s, where we see the Nagpur, Madhya Pradesh, Indore, and these kind of states getting enhanced. Cochin, somebody spoke about. So these are slowly coming up and taking their baby steps, right? So I believe that it is something that I would say that we should wait and watch, because I think there would be a time, there will be a threshold when we should be able to, or the government should be able to stabilize everything in an appropriate way. That's what my thought process is.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. I mean, we got a lot of practical insights beyond policies. Thank you so much for your inputs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.